The phone buzzed against my desk at work, and I almost ignored it. I was knee-deep in spreadsheets, the kind of mundane Tuesday afternoon where coffee goes cold and time moves like honey. But something made me look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe whispering that everything was about to crack wide open. The family group chat. 11 unread messages. My heart started its slow descent before I even opened it. Come get him. We're boarding now. My mother. No context. No apology threaded between those 7 words. I scrolled up with trembling fingers, my breath catching in my throat like a trapped bird. There were photos. The airport terminal. My sisters laughing, their perfect makeup and color-coordinated outfits like some sick Disney promotional shoot. My nieces and nephews clutching Mickey Mouse ears and boarding passes. And then I saw it. A single photo that made the world tilt sideways. My son, my Caspian. 9 years old, sitting alone on a hard airport bench, his little backpack at his feet, his face turned down like he was trying to disappear into himself. They had left him. My entire family had walked away from my child at the airport like he was forgotten luggage. My father's message came next, and it landed like a physical blow. Don't make us feel guilty. He needs to learn a lesson. My hands went numb. The office around me blurred into watercolors and white noise. What lesson? What had my gentle, quiet boy done to deserve this cruelty? I didn't reply. I couldn't breathe enough to type. I just ran. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to discover what happened next, what my son had supposedly done, and how I made them all pay for this. The highway stretched before me like a ribbon of panic, each mile marker a countdown to either relief or devastation. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone ghostly white, bloodless as bone. The radio played something cheerful and oblivious, so I slammed it off. Silence felt more honest. 43 minutes from my office in Brookhaven to the airport. I made it in 27. My mind kept circling back to 3 weeks earlier, to the dinner at my parents' sprawling ranch house in Millbrook. The smell of my mother's pot roast had filled the dining room, rich and smoky, mingling with the scent of her lavender potpourri that always made my sinuses ache. Everything had seemed normal then. Surface level perfect, like a photograph that hides the rot behind the frame. My mother, Parthenia, had announced the Disney trip with the enthusiasm of someone half her 62 years. My sisters, Thessaly and Romalie, had squealed like teenagers. Even my father, Kelton, had smiled his rare, thin smile that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. It'll be wonderful for the grandchildren, Parthenia had said, her rings catching the chandelier light as she gestured. A real family adventure. Caspian had been so excited. He'd talked about meeting Mickey Mouse for days, his dark eyes shining with a hope that made my chest ache now. He'd saved his allowance to buy a special autograph book. But somewhere between that dinner and today, something had shifted. Something had turned my family into strangers capable of abandoning a child like he was nothing more than an inconvenient problem to be solved. The airport exit sign appeared through my tears. I hadn't even realized I was crying until the road blurred into watercolor streaks of gray and white. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, tasting salt and fury. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the group chat. Thessaly, you're being dramatic, Elowen. He'll be fine. Dramatic. That word they always used to dismiss me, to make my feelings small and unreasonable. As if my terror was theater and not the most real thing I'd ever felt. I didn't respond. Words felt like weapons I wasn't ready to use yet. What I didn't know then, as I pulled into the airport loop with my heart hammering against my ribs, was that this moment would become the before. The line in the sand. The place where the old Elowen died and someone harder, clearer, was born. I found him exactly where the photo had shown. Terminal C, near the coffee shop with its sharp aroma of burnt espresso and synthetic vanilla. He sat small and folded in on himself, like a paper crane someone had tried to unfold and then given up on. Caspian. My beautiful, sensitive boy with his father's dark hair and my grandmother's thoughtful eyes. He wasn't crying. That's what broke me most. He'd gone past tears into that quiet place children go when they realize the adults have failed them completely. "Baby," I whispered, dropping to my knees in front of him. The airport floor was cold and gritty against my knees, smelling of industrial cleaner and 1,000 hurried journeys. "I'm here." "I'm so sorry." "I'm here now." He looked up at me, and in his face I saw something that would haunt me for weeks. Not relief. Not even sadness. Just a kind of weary acceptance, as if he'd already known this was how it would end. "They said I was being difficult," he said quietly. His voice was steady, controlled in a way no 9-year-old should ever have to be. "Grandma said I needed to learn that actions have consequences." "What actions?" I asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. He smelled like the apple shampoo I'd used on him that morning, back when the world still made sense. "What did you do?" He pulled something from his backpack. A crumpled piece of paper, smoothed out and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. It was a drawing. A family portrait in careful colored pencil. Me and Caspian. Just the two of us. No one else. "I showed it to Grandma," he said. "She asked what I was most excited about for Disney, and I showed her this. I said I wished it could be just us going, like a special trip." She got really quiet. Then she told Dad and everyone, and they all got upset. My blood went cold. They'd abandoned my son at the airport because he'd wished for time alone with his mother. Because his honesty had somehow wounded their fragile egos. "Uncle Branson said I was ungrateful," Caspian continued, his voice fracturing just slightly. "Aunt Thessaly said I didn't appreciate family. Grandpa said I needed to be taught about respect." I gathered him into my arms, feeling his small body finally relax against mine. Over his shoulder, I watched families rushing past, pulling luggage and holding hands and living in a version of reality where this kind of cruelty didn't exist. But it did exist. It was breathing and alive and wearing my mother's face. "Let's go home," I whispered into his hair. As we walked through the terminal, my phone buzzed incessantly. Messages flooding in now, a chorus of justification and blame. I didn't look. I just held my son's hand and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Something that felt like clarity. Something that tasted like the cold, clean edge of a decision. That night, after Caspian finally fell asleep in my bed clutching his stuffed elephant, I sat in the dark kitchen and let myself remember. The memories came like slides clicking through a projector, each one sharp and unforgiving. My childhood in that ranch house with its endless rules. The way my mother's love had always felt conditional, doled out like rations to whoever pleased her most that day. My father's silences that spoke louder than words, his disappointment a constant presence like the smell of his pipe tobacco that clung to everything. I'd been the middle daughter. Not golden like Thessaly with her perfect grades and prettier face. Not charming like Romalie with her easy laugh and uncomplicated nature. Just Elowen. Quiet, bookish, too sensitive for my own good. When I'd gotten pregnant at 22, unmarried and terrified, my mother's reaction had been surgical in its coldness. She'd sat at this same kitchen table, her coffee going cold in its china cup, and said 5 words that had carved themselves into my bones. "You've disappointed us so deeply." Not concern for me. Not questions about what I needed. Just disappointment, served up like a punishment. My father had been worse. He'd simply stopped acknowledging the pregnancy, as if ignoring it might make it disappear. When Caspian was born, small and perfect and miracle-made flesh, Kelton had taken 3 weeks to visit. He'd looked at his grandson like a problem finally demanding to be addressed. Caspian's father, Dashiell, had vanished before the 2nd trimester. A summer romance that had felt like forever but lasted barely 4 months. He'd left town for a job opportunity in Seattle and sent exactly 1 email telling me he wasn't ready to be a father. As if readiness was something you could schedule between dental appointments and car maintenance. I'd raised Caspian alone. Well, not entirely alone. My sisters had helped sometimes, in that performative way that let them feel generous without actually sacrificing anything. Thessaly would babysit for exactly 2 hours before complaining about her plans. Romalie sent elaborate gifts on birthdays, but rarely called. My mother had helped too, but every act of service came wrapped in judgment. The way she'd purse her lips when she saw Caspian's mismatched clothes. The comments about his shyness, his sensitivity, his preference for books over sports. Boys need to be toughened up, she'd said more than once, as if gentleness was a flaw that needed correcting. I'd ignored it, swallowed it, made excuses. Because they were family, and family meant something, didn't it? Family meant you endured. You forgave. You showed up again and again, even when showing up felt like voluntarily stepping into a house fire. But there are limits. Lines that, once crossed, reveal the truth that's been there all along, hiding in plain sight. They'd abandoned my son at an airport. Left him alone and afraid because his honesty had inconvenienced their narrative of the perfect family. That wasn't love wearing a harsh mask. That was cruelty dressed up in respectability. I made a decision that night in the darkness, with the refrigerator humming its tuneless song and the moon casting shadows through the window. I decided to stop pretending. Caspian was quiet at breakfast. He pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate, creating small yellow mountains and valleys, not eating. The morning light through the kitchen window was gentle and golden, but it couldn't soften what had happened. "Are they going to say sorry?" he asked finally. Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. "I don't know, baby," I said, because I wouldn't lie to him. Not about this. He deserved truth even when truth tasted bitter. My phone had 17 missed calls. 23 unread messages. I'd silenced it all. Around 10 in the morning, my mother called the house phone. That landline I'd kept only because it came bundled with internet, the one that almost never rang. I stared at it, watching the caller ID flash, Parthenia Crawford, over and over. I picked up. Elowen. Her voice was crisp, controlled, with that particular quality she used when she was preparing to be reasonable. "I think we need to discuss yesterday's situation." Situation. As if it were a minor scheduling conflict and not the systematic emotional abandonment of a child. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "Don't be childish," she snapped, and there it was. The real Parthenia underneath the reasonable facade. We were teaching Caspian an important lesson about gratitude, about family loyalty. He was being selfish and needed to understand consequences. He's 9 years old. Exactly. Old enough to know better. When I was his age, I would never have disrespected my family the way he did. Drawing that picture, saying he didn't want his cousins around. It was hurtful and inappropriate. I looked over at Caspian, who was pretending to read his book but was obviously listening. His small shoulders were tense, drawn up around his ears like he was trying to make himself invisible. "Mom," I said quietly. He expressed a feeling. That's all. He wished for one-on-one time with me. That's not disrespect. That's a child wanting his mother. "You're coddling him," Parthenia said, and I could picture her in her pristine ranch kitchen, probably wearing her pearl earrings even though she had nowhere to go. "This is exactly why he's so sensitive. You baby him instead of preparing him for the real world." Something snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet breaking, like the last thread on a fraying rope finally giving way. "The real world," I repeated slowly. The real world where adults abandon children at airports? That real world. Silence. Then, "We knew you were coming. We knew he was safe. Don't twist this into something it wasn't." What was it then? A teaching moment. I laughed. Actually laughed, and it sounded strange and foreign in my own throat. "You're calling child abandonment a teaching moment? Elowen Marie, you're being hysterical." There it was again. Hysterical. Dramatic. Childish. All the words they'd used my entire life to dismiss my feelings, to make my reality small and insignificant. "I'm done," I said. "Done with what?" "This. All of it. Don't call me again." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but underneath the trembling was something solid. Something that felt like the ground after years of quicksand. Caspian looked up from his book. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling him close. He smelled like innocence and breakfast, and all the things worth protecting in this world. "We're finally free." They tried everything over the next 2 weeks. Thessaly showed up at my house unannounced, her expression arranged into concerned sister mode, carrying a casserole like people do when someone's died. You're overreacting, she said, standing on my porch in her expensive athleisure, where that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smelled of that sharp, cloying perfume she always wore, the kind that announced her presence before she entered a room. Mom's devastated. Dad won't even talk about it. You're tearing the family apart over nothing. Nothing, I repeated, not moving from the doorway. Abandoning Caspian is nothing? Oh, come on, Ellie. It wasn't abandonment. It was tough love. He needed to learn that his attitude has consequences. You can't just let him think the world revolves around him. Behind me, I heard Caspian's footsteps pause at the top of the stairs. Listening. Always listening to how adults would define his reality. Take your casserole and leave, Thessaly. Her perfect face crumpled into something ugly. You've always been so difficult. So dramatic. Mom tried her best with you, and this is how you repay her? She gave up everything to raise us. She gave up everything, I said softly, to control us. There's a difference. I closed the door on her shocked expression. The casserole sat on my porch for 2 days before I finally threw it away, still untouched in its pristine glass dish. Romalie was next. She sent a long, rambling email about family being forever, about forgiveness, about how Caspian needed his grandparents and cousins, about how I was depriving him of important relationships because of my pride. Pride. As if protecting your child was vanity. I didn't respond. My father tried once. A single phone call where he said exactly 12 words, "You're making a mistake. Family is everything. Don't be stupid about this." Then he hung up. 12 words. That's what I was worth to him. 12 words of command dressed up as concern. But the worst came from my aunt, Bellamy, my mother's sister. She cornered me at the grocery store, her cart blocking my exit from the cereal aisle. She was wearing her church clothes even though it was a Thursday, her silver hair perfectly set. "Your mother is heartbroken," she said, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "She can't eat. Can't sleep. You're killing her with this stubbornness, Elowen." "Over what? A little discipline? When did you become so cold?" I looked at her, this woman who'd watched my mother's particular brand of love my entire life and never once questioned it. Who'd probably approved of every harsh word and calculated withdrawal of affection because that's how they'd all been raised. Punishment masquerading as parenting. "Aunt Bellamy," I said quietly, "if she's heartbroken, maybe she should examine why she thought it was acceptable to leave a 9-year-old alone at an airport. Maybe she should ask herself what kind of person does that and feels justified." He was being disrespectful. He drew a picture. A hurtful picture. Of wanting time with his mother. We stared at each other across the cart, across the gulf of 2 different worlds. In hers, children were meant to be molded and corrected, their spirits bent until they fit the approved shape. In mine, children were whole people deserving of basic human dignity. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "When they're gone and you're alone, you'll regret choosing pride over family." But I was already learning something crucial. Being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. And family wasn't the same as people who share your blood. Life became quieter without them. Simpler. Like someone had turned down the volume on a noise I'd gotten so used to I'd forgotten it was there. Caspian stopped flinching when the phone rang. He laughed more easily. He drew more pictures, and none of them carried the weight of potential punishment. We started new traditions. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals. Wednesday movie nights with too much popcorn and his choice of film, even if I'd seen it 17 times. Sunday afternoon walks in the park near our subdivision, where the air smelled like cut grass and possibility. I started noticing things I'd missed before. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about books. How gentle he was with animals, crouching down to let nervous dogs sniff his hand. His laugh, bright and unguarded, like bells. "Mom," he said one evening while we were making dinner together, "are you sad about Grandma and Grandpa?" I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board heavy with vegetables. The kitchen smelled like garlic and olive oil, warm and safe. Sometimes, I admitted. But not the way you might think. I'm sad about what they could have been. What they chose not to be. Does that make sense? He nodded seriously. Like being sad about the idea of something more than the real thing. 9 years old and already wiser than most adults I knew. Exactly like that. At work, I started speaking up more. When my boss, Cordelia, tried to assign me extra projects without extra pay, I said no. Politely. Firmly. And the world didn't end. When my coworker Lysander made a passive-aggressive comment about single mothers and work ethic, I reported it to HR. Actually reported it, instead of swallowing it down like poison I was supposed to tolerate. Small victories. Each one felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd surrendered without realizing it. I joined a support group for single parents. Sat in a circle in a community center that smelled like coffee and hope, and listened to other people's stories. Realized I wasn't alone. Realized that so many of us were carrying weight we'd been told was normal, was necessary, was just how families worked. One woman, Nephili, told a story about her parents refusing to respect her boundaries around her children. How they'd shown up unannounced, criticized constantly, and made her feel small. I thought I was being ungrateful, she said, tears streaming down her brown cheeks. They helped with money sometimes. Babysat. I thought I had to accept the bad because of the good. Heads nodded around the circle. We all knew this math. This impossible equation where love was supposed to equal endurance. But good parents don't weaponize their help, the group leader, Marcus, said gently. Support shouldn't come with emotional violence attached. Emotional violence. I'd never had words for it before. But that's exactly what it was. The constant criticism. The conditional affection. The way they made me feel like I was always failing some invisible test. That night, driving home under a sky full of stars, I felt something like peace settle over me. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the absence of the constant low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for 3 decades. Caspian was asleep in the back seat, his face peaceful in the glow of passing streetlights. I'd protected him. That's what mattered. I'd chosen him over comfort, over tradition, over the seductive lie that family meant you had to accept anything. I'd chosen love. Real love. The kind that protects instead of punishes. 6 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and the heat settled over our suburb like a blanket. The flowers in my small garden bloomed fierce and bright, and I learned I was better at growing things than I'd thought. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday in my father's precise handwriting. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, the kind he'd always used for important correspondence. It smelled faintly of his study, all leather and old paper. I almost didn't open it. Almost threw it away with the junk mail and grocery store flyers. But something made me pause. Inside was a single page, his words marching across the paper in tidy rows. Elowen, your mother has been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The doctor says she has several good years left, but she's struggling with the diagnosis. She's asking for you. Asking for Caspian. I know there's been distance between us, but family is family. She wants to make amends before her memory fails her completely. Call me. Dad. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen with the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, turning everything gold and unreal. Alzheimer's. The disease that would slowly steal her, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a shell where Parthenia Crawford used to live. I felt nothing. Then everything. Then nothing again. Should I have felt sadness? Probably. Should I have felt obligated? Maybe. But what I actually felt was a bone-deep wariness, like an animal that's learned that certain sounds mean danger. Because this is what they did. This is what they'd always done. Crisis as leverage. Illness as currency. Love as something you earned through suffering. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. Elowen. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable with emotion as always. You got my letter. I did. So you'll come? Visit? Your mother really needs to see you both. What does she want to say to us? Silence. Then, she wants to apologize. Make peace. You know how these things go. But I didn't know. Because in my experience, my mother had never apologized for anything in her entire life. She'd explained. Justified. Minimized. But never actually said the words, I'm sorry, and meant them. Dad, I said slowly, when you left Caspian at the airport, what did you think would happen? That's ancient history. We're talking about now. About your mother's health. I'm talking about consequences, I said. You wanted to teach Caspian about consequences. Well, here they are. Actions have consequences. You taught me that. You taught him that. And the consequence of what you did is that we're not in your life anymore. She's dying, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly. Slowly, but dying. Would you really deny her the chance to make things right? She's had 6 months, I replied. She's had my entire life. She chose not to make things right when it mattered. When it would have cost her pride instead of being forced by fear. You're being cruel. No, Dad. I'm being honest. There's a difference, and it's taken me 30 years to learn it. I hung up before he could respond. Before the guilt could sink its teeth in. Before the little girl inside me who still wanted her parents' approval could override the grown woman who knew better. That night, I told Caspian about his grandmother's diagnosis. He deserved to know. He listened carefully, his face serious. Are we going to visit her? He asked. Do you want to? He thought about it for a long moment. Will she say sorry? I don't know, baby. Then maybe we should wait until she's ready to, he said simply. 9 years old. And already understanding what had taken me decades to learn. That forgiveness, without acknowledgement, isn't healing. It's just volunteering for more hurt. The calls continued. Thessaly, crying about family duty. Romalie, angry about my selfishness. Aunt Bellamy, practically cursing me for my cold heart. Even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my obligation to my dying mother. She raised you, they said. She's your mother, they said. You'll regret this when she's gone, they said. But none of them said she was wrong to abandon Caspian. None of them said she should have apologized months ago. None of them acknowledged that her diagnosis didn't erase her choices, didn't undo the hurt, didn't automatically entitle her to absolution. 2 weeks after the letter, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Elowen? This is Paloma. Your mother's neurologist. My blood went cold. Is she okay? Physically, yes. But she's been asking for you constantly. It's affecting her mental state, making her anxious and agitated. I know there's family conflict, and I'm not here to judge. But I wanted you to know that seeing you might give her peace in these early stages. Dr. Paloma, I said carefully, has my mother told you why we're estranged? A pause. She mentioned a disagreement about parenting styles. Disagreement about parenting styles. That's how she'd framed leaving a child at an airport. How she'd translated cruelty into something that sounded like a philosophical difference. Did she mention abandoning my 9-year-old son at an airport 6 months ago? Longer pause. No, she didn't mention that. I appreciate your call, doctor. But my mother's peace isn't my responsibility. Especially when it comes at the cost of my son's well-being. I understand, she said quietly. And I think she actually did. That night, I lay awake staring at my ceiling, watching shadows move across the plaster. Caspian was asleep down the hall, safe and loved and protected. That's what mattered. But doubt crept in anyway, uninvited. What if I was being too harsh? What if forgiveness was the bigger act? What if she really was sorry and just didn't know how to say it? Then I remembered Caspian's face at the airport. That resignation. That acceptance of abandonment as if it were inevitable. No. Some bridges deserve to burn. Some distances are healthy. Some forgiveness is just another word for letting people hurt you again. I'd spent my whole life trying to be enough for them. Trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Trying to smooth over their rough edges while letting them sharpen themselves on mine. I was done trying. The next morning I wrote a letter. Not to my mother. To myself. To the little girl who'd never felt like enough. You were always enough, I wrote. They were the ones who couldn't see it. Their blindness was never your failure. I folded it carefully and put it in my journal. Someday, when Caspian was older, maybe I'd show it to him. Maybe I'd tell him the whole story. How his mother chose him over everything else. How love, real love, means protection even when it's painful. I called my father one last time. If Mom wants to apologize, I said, she can write a letter. A real one. Acknowledging what she did and why it was wrong. Not an explanation. Not a justification. An actual apology. And then maybe, we'll talk about visits. She has Alzheimer's, he said coldly. She might not be capable of that kind of clarity much longer. Then I guess we'll live with that, I said. Because Caspian deserves better than a deathbed reconciliation that's really just about making everyone else feel better. I hung up. The silence that followed was profound. Heavy, but clean, like the air after a storm has finally passed. The letter arrived 3 months later, in September when the air turned crisp and the leaves began their slow transformation into flame. It came in a simple white envelope, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. Shaky, uncertain, but undeniably my mother's. I held it for 2 days before opening it. Let it sit on my kitchen counter like a living thing, both feared and needed. When I finally opened it, on a quiet Sunday afternoon with Caspian at a friend's house, my hands trembled. Dear Elowen, it began. The handwriting wandered across the page, some words clear, others trailing off like thoughts escaping. I am writing this on a good day. Dr. Paloma says I should write while I still can. Before the words leave me like so many things are leaving me now. Your father wanted to dictate this, to make it proper, but I said no. These are my words. My truth. However poorly I might write them. I was wrong. I don't know if you can understand how hard those words are for me. I was raised to believe that admitting wrong was weakness. That parents were always right, and children were always learning. That love was something you earned through obedience. I loved you that way. The only way I knew. And I hurt you. Again and again. And I convinced myself it was for your own good. When Caspian drew that picture, saying he wanted time alone with you, I felt rejected. As if his honesty was an attack on me. On our family. On everything I'd built. And so I punished him for telling the truth. I taught him that his feelings were dangerous. That love was conditional. I taught him what my mother taught me. And I watched you spend your whole life trying to be enough for me, never realizing you were always enough. I just couldn't see it through my own brokenness. Leaving him at the airport was the cruelest thing I've ever done. And I've done it to you in 1,000 smaller ways your entire life. Abandoned you emotionally every time you needed me to just love you without condition. Without correction. Without turning your vulnerability into a lesson. I'm sorry, Elowen. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you needed. I'm sorry I hurt Caspian. I'm sorry I'm only saying this now, when my mind is leaving me and I might forget I even wrote these words tomorrow. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't expect it. But you deserved an apology. And Caspian deserves to know that what happened wasn't his fault. None of it was ever his fault. You've been a better mother to him in 9 years than I was to you in 30. You broke the cycle I couldn't even see I was trapped in. That's everything. I love you. I don't know if I ever told you that without attaching conditions. So I'm telling you now, I love you. Not because of anything you've done or haven't done. Just because you're mine. And I'm sorry I never knew how to show you that. Mom. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. Tears streaming down my face, hot and cleansing like rain after a long drought. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo the hurt. But it was real. Raw. Human in its imperfection. That evening, when Caspian came home smelling like grass and joy, I showed him the letter. Read it aloud while he sat beside me on the couch. What do you think? I asked when I finished. He was quiet for a long time, his 9-year-old mind processing adult complexity. I think she's trying, he said finally. That's something. Is it enough? I don't know. But maybe we could try too. Just a little. Like starting over. We visited her 3 weeks later. She was sitting in the sunroom of the ranch house, thinner than I remembered, her hands folded in her lap. When she saw us, something lit in her eyes. Recognition. Regret. Love, clumsy and late, but present. Elowen, she whispered. And Caspian. You came. We got your letter, I said. We didn't stay long. Just an hour. But it was different. She asked Caspian about his interests, really listened when he talked about his books. She didn't criticize. Didn't correct. Just listened. When we left, she hugged me. A real hug, not the stiff, performative ones from my childhood. Thank you, she whispered against my hair. For giving me another chance. We're taking it slow, I said honestly. But we're trying. Driving home, Caspian asked, "Are we going back?" "Maybe. If it stays like this. If she keeps trying. But never at the cost of you feeling safe." "That's the promise. Your safety always comes first." He nodded, satisfied. 6 months later, my mother's disease progressed. The good days became rarer. But on those good days, we visited. Not out of obligation. Not out of guilt. But because she'd earned it by finally choosing honesty over pride. She died on a Tuesday in spring, surrounded by family. In her last moments of clarity, she held my hand and whispered, "You were always enough." I carried those words like treasure. At her funeral, Thessaly tried to rewrite history. Talked about our perfect family, our loving mother. I didn't correct her. Didn't argue. Just held Caspian's hand and knew the truth. We'd survived. More than that. We'd become whole in our breaking. We'd learned that family isn't who shares your blood. It's who chooses you every day without condition. That night, back in our quiet house, Caspian drew a new picture. The two of us. But this time, there was space around us. Room for others. Not required, but welcomed if they could love us the way we deserved. "Is this better?" he asked. I looked at his drawing, at the hope and healing sketched in careful colored pencil. "It's perfect," I said. "Just like you." And I meant it. We were enough. We'd always been enough. And finally, we believed it.